You are Locked On Wolverines, your daily podcast on the Michigan Wolverines, part of the Locked On Podcast Network.
Happy Tuesday. You know what that means. We are back with the Locked On Wolverines podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it is your team every day. I have to do my customary beginning of the show mic movement situation, as always seems to happen. We are going throwback. You're going back to the season with a very popular man indeed. He was already popular in Ann Arbor. He's become that much more popular lately, and that is Mr. Jake Butt, the Mackey Award winning tight end. Jake, thanks for joining, man. Super excited to have you back.
It's been a while. It's good to be back. It's been an interesting offseason, as you and I have texted about a couple of times. So even though we are in the offseason, I think we're going to have plenty of talk about and update the fans on today. We could just start off by saying we're lucky, man. We're great. It's great to have Jim Harbaugh back. There's not many better coaches out there than Jim. So through it all, we should be grateful. Jim is still back and leading the Michigan Wolverines. I think that's a huge advantage to us.
And I agree. And this is one of the things that, like, I said this after it was announced he was returning, after all signs pointed to him leaving. Don't let those out there say that he was never leaving fool you. He was certainly had a foot out the door. But the fact that he has come back, I think, is huge for the sake of no matter who you were going to get to replace him, whether it be Luke Fickell or Matt Rule or Dave Aranda, none of them honestly are as proven or have the understanding of how things operate at Michigan, all of those types of things. So Jake, tell me, in your estimation, why do you think this is such huge news for Michigan to have Jim Harbaugh returning yet again?
I mean, just basically what you said. You look at just what is a football coach like? What is your track record? That's the way we could judge you. Jim has had success anywhere he's been. He's had success at the college level. Then he went to the NFL, and then he came back to the college level. He's had success everywhere, and he's had a massive amount of success. So, you know, it's funny to have this come full circle, because just a year ago, many people wanted Jim gone. And now I wonder how many of those same people were begging for Jim to stay. You know, Jim Harbaugh is one of the best football coaches at the college or pro level, and probably one of the best coaches in all sports. His ability to lead a team is up there with the greats. And I experienced it, and I thought he even took another step forward this year with the way the team was able to succeed. So it makes sense to me that Jim is a hot commodity and he was interviewing. I think he's earned that right. I think he's earned the right to explore and see what the best option is for him. He left. If he was to leave, I kept reminding myself he left the program. If he was going to leave the program much better than he found it. What he was able to do, we quickly forget the past history. You know, going even back to my freshman and sophomore years, or even earlier to the Rich Rod years, you quickly forget the history there of where we were. So we're very thankful to have Jim back. You know, and obviously there's going to be some mysteries here as who's going to be coordinating, you know, the Michigan Wolverine offense, I think is the next big thing, but very, very happy to have Jim back.
Well, we'll get into the coordinator talk here in a few moments, but I definitely agree that everything he brings to the table it's unparalleled, and that there are very few coaches that have the type of winning percentage that he has in his tenure. And I think, like, when you mention all the people who certainly were ready for him to leave were the ones that were probably screaming the loudest. I think that Venn diagram is just a circle, right? It's just one circle. But certainly it's great news for Michigan. And we've had that news for a while, but the question I think now is how much did his flirtation with the NFL, how much did that affect the team, the program, whether it's the coaching staff? Again, we'll talk more about the coordinators in a bit, but I mean, we've seen Josh Gaddis leave. I don't think it's any surprise that Mike McDonald has departed, given the opportunity that was afforded to him. But then on top of that, you have the players. As a former player, how much do you feel that would affect you with your head coach potentially having a foot out the door and then coming back? How much do you think that would affect your ability to go in there and trust that, hey, I got to play for this guy. He's committed to this. He says he is, of course, but how much would that impact you as a player?
So I think we're looking at a small piece of the story that doesn't tell the whole story. And you have to look at the whole story to understand this. 1 foot in, 1 foot out the door. How did we get there, though? That's where I'm at. How did we get there? Well, you look at it as like a marketing deal. Like, hey, if I'm going to represent, for example, say like State and Liberty down the street here in Ann Arbor, if I'm going to wear only State and Liberty suits, that's all I'm going to post on my Instagram. You have to pay more for exclusive rights for things, right? Well, going back to last year, Jim took a pay cut. We actually paid Jim less, even after all the success he'd had since he'd been to the program. We paid Jim less. So in that sense, we didn't own exclusive rights on Jim. And in fact, did the media play a role? Did the fan base play a role? A lot of people wanted Jim gone just last year. And he comes back and he absolutely exceeds expectations this year. From a man to a man, from a player to, I understand that this is such a business. And people forget this. This is absolutely a business. You're talking about millions and millions of dollars here. Jim took a pay cut. For him to go out there and explore other options, I think that's a perfectly reasonable thing to do. And as a player, I can't be bitter because I know Jim is such a great coach. I want him back. I'm happy to have him back. I would have played my ass off regardless, but I'm happy to have Jim back to lead our team. And we'll talk about the comments later. A guy like JJ McCarthy's comments, I think, are a really warming sign for Michigan fans to talk about the leadership within the locker room. But you understand, the process. If we kept Jim's pay stagnant or we even gave him a raise, I doubt he would have been looking for jobs this year. It's just part of the business.
Yeah, and that is certainly a part of it. It does seem like maybe the hurt feelings are more on the coaching end than anything else, and we're seeing a little bit more movement than I think any of us anticipated. So we'll talk about that here on the other end. But before we do, Jake, I got to tell you a little something about Bet Online. They have you covered this season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before as football continues its march through the playoffs, right to the big game in a couple weeks. BetOnline.net remains the best spot for all your sports scores, podcasts, and news this season. It's not just football. BetOnline has up-to-the-minute info on pro and college hoops, NHL, boxing, UFC, right along live with real-time updates of current games. So don't wait to take advantage of the new amazing offers available for the 2022 season. BetOnline, where the game starts. All right, Jake. So one of the big things that has happened in the aftermath now, Michigan did lose Mike McDonald to the Baltimore Ravens. I think that's it. One of the fun, I want to take a step back because I thought this was hilarious. This is something I would normally mention to you off air, but I'm going to mention it to you on air. I thought it was hilarious when I saw that my former colleagues over at Bucknuts, the Ohio State 24/7 sports page, they tried to frame it yesterday as Michigan lost another defensive coordinator. Is there reason for panic in Ann Arbor because they keep losing defensive coordinators? I'm like, okay, well, they let one go, right? Because after he was there for, well, let's back up because they tried to actually posit it as a Jim Harbaugh problem. Like he can't keep defensive coordinators. DJ Durkin got a head coaching job and they brought in Don Brown, who was there from 2016 to 2020. And then after the way things went, Michigan decided to go in another direction. They go and get Mike McDonald, who was so good that he got a defensive coordinator position in the NFL. Like, how is that a problem? It was like, ooh, just doesn't want to be around Jim. So he took a tremendous promotion. Yeah. Doesn't make any sense.
I can't relate to the take. I mean, if you just look at the NFL, for example, with all the coaching carousel that's been going on right now, what do you always hear about? The McVay tree, the Belichick tree, the Shanahan tree, for example. People go, that's a sign of a healthy program and a good staff. Other programs that are looking for their next big hire are going to pluck you from the staff. They're looking for a coordinator to become a head coach, or they're looking for a position coach to become a coordinator. That's a sign of a healthy staff. So, and again, I wanted to say this: the turnover is a bit expected. You should expect it in this business. There is no lifetime contracts anymore. There's going to be turnover, especially when you have success. So you should expect it and plan for it. And I'm sure Michigan has we have the ability to go out and make our choice, make our pick on who we want. So it's a sign of a healthy program. You should expect it and anticipate it and go out there. I'm sure Jim used to say when we would fire one guy or one guy would leave, we got to hire somebody even better. Maybe that's somebody on staff. Maybe that's somebody out there, either in the NFL or the another team in the NCAA. But I'm confident in Jim's ability to draw in more talent, because that talent also knows if I come succeed at Michigan, the next big job is around the corner, part of the business.
Yeah, exactly. And but I think everyone was a little bit, I don't want to say blindsided, because I don't think that's, I think we were preparing for Josh Gaddis to be gone after last year, won the Broyles Award. It just seemed like he was probably on his way out. We thought probably for a head coaching job, perhaps a collateral for the way that things went, just based off of where he stood in the pecking order as potential Michigan head coach replacements for Jim, which probably didn't know going into this season until Jim flirted with the Vikings. It appears that that played a role, but Gaddis now having taken a lateral move to Miami, that does change things, because now it doesn't, when it went looking like at one point, like Michigan was only going to lose one assistant in Sean Nua, who left for USC. Then Mike McDonald gets poached by Jim's brother. Then now you lose Gaddis. Now it seems like there's a lot of shuffling. With that in mind, it seems like they want to try to keep the same thing schematically on both sides of the ball. How confident are you that no matter who they bring in, that the offense is going to be able to continue to build on what it did with it, but albeit with a new coordinator, and that the defense, which has lost a ton of personnel, is going to be able to find a way to replicate the same success as last year?
To start, I think this feels a little bit panicked and like a carousel, because it happened of the timing of when it happened. Had it happened when every other program was doing it, it kind of gets blended into the news. But people thought that coaching, the carousel was done at that point. And that now it's happening a little bit later. It's isolated, stands out. I would say in order to keep the same scheme, you probably have to hire from within. So you can even look at offensively. If we hire, a coach from within the offense, there's probably going to be a lot of carryover. And there's always carryover from system to system. Guys are running the same plays. It's just about what you call it. When do you call it? So there could be some similarities. I think they saw the success last year, and would like to, implement some of the similar things regardless of the coordinator. Another thing to consider is, who do you feel your quarterback's going to be on offense? Because it will be a different offense if JJ's quarterbacking than Cade. So that's another interesting to consider here is whoever's being hired, how they're going to handle that process. And I'm sure Jim will have some input. But if you hire from within, you're probably going to be able to keep a lot of the similar things, same names. It'll be easier for the players. If you go externally, usually you wipe out the playbook and start fresh with the new coordinators.
And it does seem like going from within is what they seem intent to do. All signs point to Matt Weiss, which makes complete sense. And I said this on the show yesterday. Matt Weiss was brought in as a quarterbacks coach. He was way too qualified to move from being the run game coordinator with the Baltimore Ravens and the success that they had, the most prolific run offense that the NFL has ever seen under his tutelage, to come and be a quarterbacks coach at Michigan. So it was very obvious that he was probably the guy in waiting. So it looks like that's going to happen. And yet I still see Michigan fans, kind of some of them, not a ton, but some of them, wringing their hands because they're like, I don't think he's ready, which is like, if we see position coaches become NFL head coaches, it happened in Detroit, like Dan Campbell was a tight ends coach and became a head coach. And no one really bats an eye on the NFL level, but only in Ann Arbor could a guy I think in Ann Arbor, you could take a defensive coordinator directly from the NFL and people would be like, I don't know. He hasn't done it at the college level. You know what I mean? But nonetheless, the defense, I think, is also going to be an interesting situation, just based off of, I don't know that they are going to go internal for that job. But Jim has supposedly said that he does want to keep the same scheme. So I think that does kind of narrow your amount of candidates. But I mean, how do you feel? I think offensively, I think we probably both feel pretty good about Michigan going into the next season, but defensively, what are your thoughts? I mean, obviously we don't even know who the defensive coordinator is, but personnel wise, all of the above, how do you feel at this moment in February?
Defensively is going to be a much bigger challenge, and that's just based on the fact that offense, you're returning a significant amount of your playmakers, and you have another. Even if it's Cade, he's another year more experience. He should be improved. If it's JJ, obviously that's going to add a new dynamic to the offense. Having all the tight ends come back is really, really big. You don't have to necessarily make massive overturns on your offensive line. So it should be an easier transition on offense. Defense, not only did you lose some players, you lost some of your best players who happen to be some of the best players in the country at their position. We're going to see a couple guys go in the first, second, third round of this year's NFL draft. So you can keep the same scheme, but it's a lot easier to run any scheme when you got Aiden Hutchinson and David Ojabo coming off the edge. They're gonna correct a lot of mistakes just by their talent. So that's going to be a big replacement, just as much as who the coordinator will be. So again, the scheme is the foundation. So as long as you have a good scheme, a good teacher, you can get 11 guys playing collectively as one unit. That's really what matters. So I hope whoever it is that comes in is a good teacher, a good communicator, and has a good scheme.
It's going to be interesting, and I want to allude to one thing that you said much earlier before we move on. But like you said, this was after the general coaching carousel that some of these things are happening. But don't you also feel like it's still a good time for this to happen, because this is happening in January and February and not April, May, June? You know, we've certainly seen situations where teams have had to find themselves in a sudden change, but off the field late. I mean, even last year, Michigan in late April had to bring in another coach because we saw, well, before spring, we saw Brian Jean-Marie depart, and then, or was that after? But then we also saw Maurice Linguist afterwards get the job over in Buffalo. So how much do you think that some of these things will kind of essentially be forgotten in a couple months, because you got all the time in the world in a sense, really?
Yeah, I mean, first, relatively, yeah, this is better than later in the year. Hindsight's always 2020, but I don't think Michigan should ever be in a panic position when it comes to filling in empty spots, just because of how desirable the school is and the resources we do have to deploy. We can give a lot of, relative to a lot of places, we can pluck from other staffs and give them a raise just because this is the University of Michigan. There's a handful of schools that have that power. Ohio State, Alabama, Georgia, Clemson, Oklahoma, Texas, some of these other schools, they have more resources. So as long as you have a good foundation and a head coach, and you have a lot of talent, good recruits, you should be able to pluck. Now, it'll all be forgotten once we get on the field next fall, though. Then the results matter. You know, if we do well, no one's going to be talking about it. If there's even a little bit of hesitation, just understanding how the social media portion of our fan base works, there's going to be a little uproar. There's going to be questions. I still think, especially on offense, which seems to be a lot of people's main concern with Gaddis's departure, I still think we have a lot of talent on this offense, and that's a position that you don't mess up. You know, you just go in there and run it, and you should be good just because of the level of talent you have.
Yeah, I agree, and I certainly think that especially if they do make the move for Matt Weiss, I don't think it will miss a beat whatsoever. And the corollary to what you're saying about once the season comes, the good news is that schedule, especially those first 3 games, it's this is the easiest non-conference schedule I can remember Michigan having in a very, very long time. I'm talking like a decade, right? Mm-hmm. There's no Notre Dame on there. I mean, you have 0 Power 5 teams in those first 3 games, and then you open up Big Ten with Maryland, who certainly could be improved, especially if they can find a way to get a defense going. But it's a home game for Michigan. Maryland hasn't won since 2014 in this series, and that was a Michigan team that you were on that was completely fallen apart at that point. So I think that all sets up very well for the Wolverines. All right, Jake, we're going to talk a little bit about J.J. McCarthy's comments that he made to Angelique Shingelis and of the Detroit News, and what that means But before we get to that, I do have to tell you a little something about Rock Auto. This episode is brought to you by Rock Auto. With the ever-increasing numbers of makes and models, it's now impossible for your local chain auto parts store to stock all the parts you need. Why endure more often, pointless, or seemingly intimidating questioning and wait while the person behind the counter orders the parts on their computer, choosing only the brands their warehouse happens to carry? You have computers with access to rockauto.com at home and in your pocket. Save time and money when using Rock Auto. Why choose to spend 30, 50, or even 100% more for the same parts from a chain store or car dealership? Rock Auto is a family business. They've been serving do-it-yourselfers for over 20 years. I've personally used their service a lot. It saved me literally thousands of dollars when I had that crap shack of a Cadillac. Rock Auto prices are reliably low for every customer. Have everything you could need: brake parts, tail lamps, motor oil, even new carpet. Go explore their easy-to-use website today. Find the solution to your auto parts needs. So go to rockauto.com right now. See all the parts available for your car or truck. Right, locked on in there. How did you hear about us box? So they know that we sent you. Amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need. rockauto.com. All right, Jake, to finish out, JJ McCarthy had some really interesting comments about I think that they were in line with what I've been telling people before. Obviously, all the Harbaugh speculation, will he leave, will he stay, all of that kind of stuff. But I think it also created some insight in just to who he is. And I remember getting into an argument with my cousin at my grandma's birthday 2 days before Christmas. I love my cousin. I want to say that just in case, especially in case he's listening. I don't think he is, but if he is, he does tend to sometimes think he knows more than me about subjects in which I am literally an expert, whether it was when I was in Hollywood working and now with Michigan football. And he was very adamant that he thought that JJ McCarthy was going to transfer. And I said, no way. There's no way that he's going to transfer. And he's like, I think he will. And I was like, well, as someone who has JJ McCarthy's number in my phone, someone who has spoken to him in person, one-on-one, trust me that that's not going to happen. And I would have made a little bit more sense maybe if it would have happened, if Jim would have left for the NFL, because I could see a situation where it's like, well, I came here to be coached by Jim Harbaugh and Josh Gaddis. And he had a great relationship with Josh, but he comes out and makes a firm stance saying, I am not going anywhere. This is the place for me. How huge is that to have a guy of that caliber, former 5-star, future leader of your team, maybe even a current leader on your team, to have that type of mentality of, it doesn't matter who the coach is, doesn't matter who my competition is. I am a Wolverine for life.
Massive. And it just, in the world we live in today, where players can leave and they can go explore all their other options. And we clearly have been talking about that there is no loyalty. A guy like JJ, when he makes a comment like that, really stands out. And it expands on the fact that quarterbacking at this level is so much more than having a big arm or an accurate arm. There's a certain DNA you look for when you say this guy could potentially be great. And JJ has that. And I think you find out about how great a person is only when they're tested with adversity. And it's through that testing when a guy says, I'm going to walk through the smoke. It doesn't matter. I'm going to make it work. I'm committed to making this right. I believe in myself. That's the guy I want on my team. You go back, you have a body of evidence now. You go back to the Michigan State game. I know JJ was hurt about that fumble. I know he regretted that, but he didn't blink the rest of the season. It motivated him to work harder. That's the type of person with a certain type of DNA. When they get disrespected or when they mess up, they don't hide from it. They turn back and face it, and it motivates them to go even harder. I think those comments were just a good opportunity to show you again, this guy JJ, we really have something with him. He's got the potential to be really, really special. Obviously has the arm talent, already has the ability to move around and create with his feet, but his DNA is what I'm most interested in. You follow him on social media, see the way he carries himself. He's got that it factor.
Yeah. So one of the things that I'm going to share with you and share with everyone watching and or listening. That's the type of story I normally wouldn't share on here, but for the sake of plausible deniability, but I'm going to anyway. So I obviously I know the Hutchinson family quite well, Melissa and Chris, and I covered Aiden's recruitment. I went to games in which when Aiden was in high school, that's how I got to know them, and of course I see them around quite a bit. And as we were preparing to get ready for Michigan to head, I think it was to head to Indianapolis for the Big Ten championship game. Uh, it was either then or it was for before the college football playoff. So it was somewhere there in December. I ran into Melissa and Chris, and I was talking to them for a minute. And I was talking to Melissa in particular, and she was sharing about how the mentality of the team previous to the team that we were witnessing in that moment. And she was saying how some of these players, in particular, like Aiden, and she mentioned someone else, and I can't really remember who. She said, like, in 2019 against Wisconsin, when Michigan got punched in the mouth, he said that there were players on the sidelines that were crying, right? Like the game still had 40 minutes left, and they were crying and essentially had given up. And Aiden was one of those guys, for instance, who was like, what is going on here? But he didn't feel like he was a leader enough yet to be able to come out and say, like, hey guys, quit it. Nope, this is not how we handle ourselves as a team. And she said that he made it a point at that point to turn things around. He said, when I get to that point, when I can be an unquestioned leader, I am not going to let our team behave that way. And then she said, you know who else already has that mentality and is already starting to gain the locker room in that same sense as Aiden? JJ McCarthy. Says he has that same thing. And she also said the same thing of Cade, by the way, but said that particularly JJ, she's like, I see all of that same mentality, that same drive, that same energy that Aiden has had and that helped galvanize the team in JJ McCarthy. So it'll be interesting to see how things go moving forward, especially with this quarterback competition in general, because I think that people undersell, and I mean, we've talked, not you and I, because we have been vehement Cade McNamara defenders all year, even when it was not fashionable to be so, but he certainly is one of the leaders that has helped galvanize this team as well. So,
well, they both know too, is just to expand on that. Jim said it. The position's only ever rented. You don't own it. Well, maybe a couple. Tom Brady owns a position. Aaron Rodgers, Russell, those guys own it. No one owns it here, though. That is going to be a competition, and I always firmly believe competition brings out the best in everybody. These guys are going to be going back and forth. They're going to elevate each other. It's a really good problem to have, is to have two really good quarterbacks. So I think it's a sign of a very, very healthy team. I think that what you just said really, really matters. Because when we had all the talent in the world my freshman year, that 2013 team, I think we ended up having like 20-plus guys make NFL rosters from that team. We were very, very talented. But like, where was like the lead, like the ownership, the leadership? Was the locker room united? Was there belief amongst the locker room? I didn't feel it until maybe later in my career. And part of that's Jim, but you definitely could see that's the team's mentality this year, is everybody was united on a common goal. You're going to win a lot of games when you have that at your back.
So that'll be the next goal, is now that Jim is back, and now that just to bring things full circle, that once they get their new coaches in place, then is to recapture that. And for those saying that Michigan, and I was talking to a colleague and he said Michigan's really showing 9-3 vibes right now. I said, it's February, man. Like, we haven't even been through spring ball. Like, no one's going to remember this. I mean, we'll probably remember it because, Michigan will be like 8-0 or whatever going into the Michigan State game, or 7-0, whatever week that is. And certainly you're going to hear all them be like, oh, but Jim almost left for the NFL. And it's going to be like, okay, great. Thanks, guys. Yep. But aside from rivalry tactics, I don't think that anyone's really going to remember any of this, especially if Michigan does as they should and go 3-0 to start the season. Well, Jake, so awesome to have you back on. Obviously, we'll love to have you back again soon, but appreciate you breaking it down with us.
Anytime.
All right. For Jake, the Mackey Award winning tight end, I am Isaiah Hole, Locked On Wolverines podcast. We will talk to you again soon. Thanks for watching and or listening. Peace.